This is the story of Monty Python's Life of Brian.
By what name are you calling him?
Brian!
We worship you, O Brian.
Our film will chart the birth of the project.
The idea of actually doing something based on the gospel story, I remember thinking at the time, oh, this could provoke an awful lot of reaction.
How it struggled to find backers for such a controversial film, and how, on its release in 1979, it delighted many and upset some others, but went on to become probably the world's best-loved and only biblical comedy. And this is the story of how Brian came to pass. In the year of our Lord 1976, the Pythons were flushed with success. Their TV show had made them cult stars in the UK and US, and the release of their first feature, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, had propelled them to even greater international success. Our story begins in Amsterdam, where the Pythons were publicizing the Holy Grail and generally drinking heavily.
We'd been doing our publicity for Grail. It sort of brought us back together again. And I think we must have felt, well, the Grail's going down well. Maybe we should do another movie.
The moment was really in Amsterdam, one of our drunken pub crawl one evening. And that was Eric when he said, wouldn't it be great? Let's do Jesus Christ, Lust for Glory. And I fell off the chair because that was so outrageous and wonderful and spot on.
When we got back to London, people started to take the idea of looking at this period, at this sort of mythic, because the great thing about the Grail is it's a myth that we understand, and therefore you can play with it in the mock-heroic way. But here was a whole area and a subject which nobody had ever done for comedy. And that was very appealing, because you go, well, why not?
My reaction to the idea of doing a Bible story was slightly disappointing because I always thought the costumes were so boring. I remember going to Church of England school, every time we had to paint a biblical scene, I thought, oh, everybody just in long robes, it's not very interesting.
Born in the 1940s, all of the Pythons had received some form of religious education, but Christianity was either rejected or distrusted by each.
I was at boarding school for 12 years, so we were forced to go to church twice on Sundays. The usual Church of England upbringing, hymn singing and beating.
There was a lot of religion thrown at us, but very little that was explained, certainly satisfactorily. And by the time I finished at Clifton, I'd been confirmed, and I'd sat around for some weeks expecting some golden glow to descend on me. And when it didn't, I became fairly atheistic or humanistic.
I was, in many ways, a little zealot. I had read the Bible at least twice by the time I was about 16. So I knew my stuff. I can do Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel. I can do all those things.
We used to have this old padre who was 76 and had been in the First World War and was rather good and taught us bad Latin. And I remember one of the boys asking him whether he believed in all this and whether it was true. And he said, well, old bean, not really. And that was something from the padre. So he went, okay, got it. Okay, thank you, move on.
I decided I'd had enough. It came about because I was always telling jokes. That's what I do. I make fun of things. I laugh at things. I find humor in things. And a lot of the people in the church found this offensive, I think is the word that they would use now. They probably didn't use that then. And I got really angry. I said, what kind of God is this that you believe in that can't take a joke? Especially my puny, pathetic little jokes. So I sort of walked away from religion around that time and thought education is better.
We were lucky because we shared the same attitudes to what religion wasn't. I don't think you could have ever got the Pythons to agree on what it was, but certainly we agreed on what it wasn't, and that was lucky.
Before the Pythons could begin work on their biblical project, they decided to research their subject thoroughly.
When we started off to write it, we said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to read everything about it. So we all did a 3-week Cambridge research period.
I remember going with Terry and the others to see screenings of other biblical epics like Quo Vadis and Solomon and Sheba and all that. They were pretty dreadful.
We realised that after about watching 3 or 4 of them, we suddenly realised they all had one thing in common. And that was that everybody in the film spoke in this very special way because they were aware that they were living at a time when something very wonderful was happening, And I remember saying to the others that, people will find our film shocking because it'll be the first biblical film in which people speak in normal voices.
Speak up!
Quiet, Mum.
Well, I can't hear a thing.
Biblical epics viewed and the Gospels reread led all to realize that concentrating on Jesus was not the answer.
You've got Christ saying very good things and saying the right things and as a wonderful figure. So that's not where the fun lies, really.
And that's why we actually didn't take the piss out of Jesus. We left him alone because what's the point of it? I mean, what he said was rather good. What his followers then got up to is something quite different.
The comedy, it seemed pretty clear, was in the interpretation of the gospel, and the fact that you have Christ preaching a gospel of peace and love and charity to all, and then for the next 2,000 years people are killing each other and torturing each other because they can't agree about quite how he said it or how you interpret this.
And throughout the land shall be a great rubbing of pots.
And the angle that we all agreed on in the end was that you'd look at the historical situation in Judea at that time. Very interesting things going on, including this Messiah fever. It was a time when the sort of millennium was being sort of thought about again, and people were expecting God to come down and clean up the world and all that. So people were looking for messiahs. And so the idea of someone being chosen as the Messiah when all he is somebody happens to be around at the same time in the same place, seemed to unlock a way of doing this.
No!
Once you start thinking about it, and start just thinking of it in everyday terms, you see, you accept that this happened. But when Mary said to Joseph, I'm pregnant, but it's okay, I wasn't with anyone because the Holy Spirit comes down, and then Joseph goes off to the pub and says to his friends, I was a bit worried that my wife was here. It's all right, because she was impregnated by the Holy Ghost, and all his friends say, oh, fine, well, that's a relief. You see what I mean? The moment you start looking at this stuff, there's a funny side to it.
As the Pythons set out to write their lampoon of the blindly faithful, events elsewhere took an ominous turn, when for the first time in 55 years a prosecution was brought for blasphemy.
Gay News published a poem by a minor poet called James Kirkup called The Love That Dares to Speak Its Name. It's a kind of meditation by a centurion at the crucifixion of Christ, and he meditates on the wounds of Christ, and he rather gets off on these wounds. And Mrs. Mary Whitehouse took objection to this particular poem, and therefore she launched a private prosecution for blasphemous libel against Gay News and its editor, Dennis Lemon.
In the 1960s and 70s, Mary Whitehouse was the UK's self-proclaimed guardian of Christian morality. As the leader of the National Viewers and Listeners Association and leading voice in the Christian campaigning group The Festival of Light, she was on a mission to clean up British media.
Last Thursday evening, we sat as a family and we saw a programme that started at 6:35. And it was the dirtiest programme that I have seen for a very long time.
And Mary Whitehouse had the poem in Gay News in her sights.
Because she felt inside, that this is Christ being crucified again, and that we really cannot stay silent about this.
Defending Gay News was lawyer John Mortimer.
Mrs. Whitehouse and her adherents prayed in the passages of the Old Bailey, and Gay News was convicted.
Dennis Lemon was sentenced to 9 months in prison, 18 months suspended, fined £500, and Gay News was fined £1,000. So by the time the Gay News trial happened, there was a kind of new definition which actually the judge gave. He said that the particular offence of blasphemy was irreverence, scurrility, profanity, vilification, or licentious abuse of the Christian religion. Now, of course, irreverence, scurrility, profanity, vilification and licentious abuse sums up Monty Python humour beautifully.
The Pythons decamped to Barbados for 2 weeks to hone the script without interruptions or family pressures.
Well, I was in Barbados and having a wonderful time at Christmas in Heron Bay. And there was this notion that we'd have to get together for 2 weeks and write. And I'm thinking, now, I could go back to London, or I could persuade them all to come to Barbados.
And Terry and I sort of slightly reluctantly agreed, thinking, well, when we go to Barbados, we're just going to want to water ski and swim and eat and hang out. Who's going to want to write a film?
I think Barbados is really one of the smartest things we did, because it's the first time we actually all went away at one time to one place and just locked ourselves off. And we laughed and had a wonderful time. And I think it was a good way of working, because these ideas were thrown around really fast and things would be adjusted and shifted, new ideas would come in. And you'd play charades with Mick Jagger and Jerry Hall at night, and Alan Price would get on the piano. We were famous once upon a time.
If you're in London, Cleese has to go and do a voiceover. Chapman's meeting a gay man in a pub in Hampstead, Palin sliding up. Everybody's got an excuse to go away. But if you were together in a house, which we got this beautiful house, Heron Bay, and we all stayed in it, and it was like a collegiate experience, because that means that when you stop writing, you don't stop talking or thinking about it.
People had written very good stuff. I mean, things like the writing on the wall at night, the Latin. I remember John and Graham coming up with that and thinking, this is terrific, this is just what we want.
Romanes eunt domus. People call Romanes, they go the house.
It says Romans go home.
No, it doesn't. What's Latin for Roman? Come on.
Romanus?
Goes like.
Annus?
Vocative plural of annus is.
Annie?
Romani.
I think it was in those last 2 weeks when we were all together that really the themes of the film came out, like, think for yourselves, don't do what you're told, And some of those scenes were written at the last moment, and it felt to me that it was all coming together in a very good way.
The Pythons flew home with a finished script, and even though there'd been a recent prosecution for blasphemy, they'd made no compromises.
I don't think there was any moment when we thought, well, we don't want to do that because it might be blasphemous.
I was always convinced there was nowhere you couldn't go, or you shouldn't go, more to the point. I think there are no sacred cows, and if they are there, if they're really sacred, then let's see how much we can puncture them and see if they still float.
The next big task was to find funding for the film, £2 million. It was always going to be a struggle to get backing for such a controversial film, but undeterred, they sent the script to EMI.
I sat one sunny Sunday afternoon in my garden, and I've never read a funnier script in my life, before or since. It was just a joy. I told John Golston that we would like to make the picture, and that was that.
We shook hands. He opened a bottle of champagne, and I was kind of taken aback in a way, because negotiations for finance was never supposed to be that easy.
With EMI on board, the team looked for a place to film, and they soon settled on Tunisia.
I mean, you have to remember that Tunisia and that part of Monastir was all set up for biblical epics. That's where they made, I think it was Lou Grade's Jesus Christ with Robert Powell in and all that. So they had the temples, they had the tabernacles. All these Arab extras are quite used to coming along and being Jews for, sort of a day and a half.
Pre-production began, costumes were made, sets began to be built. All that was left now was to decide on the casting. It was becoming clear that the biggest decision would be who was going to play Brian. Graham Chapman was the leading contender, having played King Arthur in the Grail film, but John Cleese wanted to be Brian too.
I wanted to be Brian for one simple reason, which was that I'd never played a role that went all the way through the movie. And I was very interested to know what it would be like.
I'm afraid the rest of us were rather against it, because A, I couldn't see John as Brian, quite honestly. And B, we thought there was all these other parts that we wanted John to do.
He's so brilliant at Reg. I mean, to me, that's one of the great performances. There's Peter Sellers doing I'm All Right, Jack, and there's Reg. These are the both great left-wing figures of the trade union movement portrayed on screen.
And what have they ever given us in return?
Nobody could have done that like he did. And nobody could have done the Centurion as well as he did.
They were right, because they said, no, you will be funnier and the film will be funnier if you play the Centurion and Reg. And I was disappointed just because I wanted the experience. But after, very, very soon I realized they were right. And also Graham, who was a tremendously good actor. I think probably potentially almost the best actor of all of us.
So everybody else acts, I think, and Graham doesn't act, really. Graham was just Graham, and Graham carries off both Arthur and Brian with this kind of sincerity, with this sort of seriousness that works on screen, that he's not acting, he's really serious, and he is doing this part, being Brian, you know.
February 1978, and everything was now in position to start filming. All were ready to leave for Tunisia in several days. And then the boss of EMI, Bernard Delfont, read the script.
I suddenly get a very, very angry telex in those days from Bernard Delfont, who was chairman of the EMI entertainment section. He said, I've looked rather quickly through the script of the new Monty Python film and I'm amazed to find that it's not the zany comedy usually associated with his films, but is obscene and sacrilegious and would certainly not be in the interest of EMI's image to make this sort of film. Every few words there are outrageous swear words, which is not in keeping with Monty Python's image. This is very distressing to me and is a very serious situation. I thought it's clearly ridiculous. He doesn't know anything about films. He shouldn't be making these judgments. I called him up and spoke to him and said, Bernie, you've got the wrong end of the stick. I can assure you, as a Catholic, not normally a qualification I use in the film industry, that this is not blasphemous. It really isn't, and I don't think we should worry about that. And he had obviously made up his mind that it was, and he, after a lot of spluttering, and I argued with him, and eventually he lost his temper, and he used the immortal words, I'm not going to have people saying that I'm making fun of fucking Jesus Christ.
You see, the thing was that Bernard's brother, Lou Grade, had just made Jesus of Nazareth. So you see, he suddenly got a lot of brownie points from the establishment. So I think Bernard thought he was going to go through life with horns and a tail. So they backed out, despite the fact that the contract was valid.
It was a mortal blow when EMI pulled out because, we had no other option at the time.
We'd done all the prep, everything down there. Now the crew was getting on planes on Saturday morning and head to Tunisia. And on Thursday, we got the call saying, Bernie Delfont has finally read the script and has pulled the plug. Oops! The whole thing explodes.
You're shocked initially, and then you think, well, have faith in what you're doing. There has to be another way to do this.
A race to find finance for the film ensued, with Eric Idle and producer John Goldstone departing for America.
Eric Idle, who's always been the kind of more entrepreneurial of the group, said, he had various contacts in America, and I had as well.
John Goldstone and I flew to New York and then LA trying to find people to invest in this film. And we went to Revlon, and they would always see us because they were always happy to see a python, and they liked Python, but then nobody really wanted to touch this with a barge pole.
I actually thought the thing wasn't going to happen. I remember I accepted a role working with Peter Sellers in Vienna doing a remake of Prisoner of Zenda.
And then, anyway, a miracle happened. A miracle, St. George of Harrison.
Eric Idle said, well, the one person that has always been a big Python fan is George Harrison.
I met George at the screening here in LA at the Directors Guild of an early screening of The Holy Grail. And we became bosom pals, and we were very good friends by this point.
George had heard about Life of Brian and wanted to help, so John Goldstone and Eric sent him a script and set up a meeting at his Hollywood home.
And Eric and I went up there, and George was there, and it didn't take him very long to say, I'll finance this. I think it's great.
I was absolutely staggered. I was really amazed, because he'd been saying that all along, but I'd never really taken him seriously.
Basically, that's it, I suppose. I just wanted to see the film.
George Harrison offered to put up all the money himself to the tune of $4 million.
What we did was we pawned my house and the office in London, and to get a bank loan. And that was a bit nerve-wracking.
George set up Handmade Films to finance Life of Brian, a company that would go on to make other feature films like Withnail and I and Mona Lisa. And so, several months later than planned, in September 1978, the 41-day shoot began in Tunisia. It was decided that Terry Jones should direct the film, with Terry Gilliam in charge of art direction. This was a change from the Holy Grail film, where both men had directed together, a situation that had caused some tension.
The two Terrys had directed The Grail, and it obviously drove them both mad. And so, which way should it go? Because Terry Gilliam has this brilliant look, and and then Jones is very, very good at getting the comedy on the screen.
Terry Jones was the better comedy director of the two. I think Gilliam is great on anything visual, but I don't think he's as strong on narrative, and I don't think he's as funny as Terry Jones. So for me, I would have voted for Terry all the way down the line. And I don't remember any fights. I don't remember quite, but it was quite clear that if we could get Terry Gilliam to do the art direction, that was going to be superb.
Terry was important to be the director because I would have got caught up in all sorts of detail that would have riled the others. And because John didn't want to wear this, and then they didn't want to do all the things that I think are important to film: wearing uncomfortable clothes, having grotesque makeup, all those things.
Terry and I sort of fell out at one point. I think I said something rather stroppy to Terry at some point because I thought he was bending the cameraman's ear more, and I was wanting to sort something out. And it took Terry a long time to forgive me. I think he didn't speak to me for quite a while.
And Terry and I always thought we were very, very close. We are in most things. We love each other.
I hadn't thought of that before now, but just thinking about it, he probably just kept out of my way because he was feeling so pissed off with me.
I am convinced I've got a better visual sense than Terry. It's the only thing I'm better at. Everything else he's better at. It's one little area I'm pretty good at.
And the first scene to shoot was the stoning sequence.
So I think there was a feeling right from the beginning, and the very first scene I think that was shot was the stoning scene, that this could be very funny indeed. And so morale was high.
And so, as a blasphemer!
We were there on day one. And Jonesy was so well prepared, it was shot like that, and I suddenly thought, my God, this is fun.
With Python, because we work on the script, the actual acting isn't very hard because you've rehearsed it all those times by reading it. So it's not like, so what do we do with this scene? It's like it's pretty well established how that will play, what the cadences are, what the rhythms are.
By lunchtime, I was in the pool. We'd finished the scene.
The Pythons were keen that all should enjoy the shoot as much as possible, although there were some problems with this approach.
When we arrived, and it was all lovely, late summer weather by the Mediterranean, they said, we've decided to let everybody have 2 hours at lunchtime, because then they can go and have a decent meal, have a swim. And we thought, this is paradise. We're in a holiday resort, and we're now being given 2 hours in the middle of the day. Of course, after 3 days, it was abolished, that theory, because the cameraman said that the surprisingly little amount of light each day, it ended at about 5:30. He said, if I lose 2 hours in the middle of the day and my best time, we're never going to get anywhere. The good nature of the Pythons in trying to make us all have a good time for 2 hours, it just wasn't allowed to last very long.
Lunch was cut to an hour, but the relaxed atmosphere continued.
For me, it was a really happy shoot. I kind of had the feeling that we were on the crest of a wave, that it was really working, everything was working. It was a real breeze, actually.
With about 70 cast and crew, the film unit needed a medic, and they found one in Graham Chapman, who had trained as a doctor many years before.
On location, he was the doctor, and so he would play Brian, sort of Jesus, the healer, and in the mornings he would have surgery, and the evenings he'd have surgery.
And he became the unit doctor, and this wonderfully wise man, puffing on his pipe and making sure everybody's bowels are all right, and advising on sunburn and headaches and all this sort of thing.
He took it really very seriously, so that having rushed around in his loincloth all day as Brian, he'd immediately get back to his surgery.
70 people might be waiting for him to prescribe and hand out drugs, and it was something rather perfect about that.
While the Pythons played multiple roles, they had also brought to Tunisia a small repertory company of actors to play a variety of characters. There was Terence Baylor, Charles McEwen, Andrew McLaughlin, Carol Cleveland, John Young, Gwen Taylor, Chris Langham, and Bernard McKenna.
Hands up, all those who don't want to be crucified here. Right, next!
Midway through filming, in a bizarre coincidence, Spike Milligan, star of The Goon Show and a huge influence on all of the Pythons, suddenly popped up in Monastir.
Spike happened to be in Tunisia because he was visiting the Second World War battlefields on which he'd fought. And he suddenly turns up in Monastir, can't get a room in a hotel because the entire Python team is there.
Spike was invited to spend the day on the set and was also given a cameo.
Yea, he cometh to us like the seed of the grave.
But after lunch, when they were due to shoot Spike's close-up, he was nowhere to be found. Many of the scenes required huge crowds, and working with a large number of non-English-speaking extras caused Terry Jones some challenges, especially for the filming of Willis Bwayan.
People of Jerusalem!
It was our biggest crowd scene. We had 500 people there. And we thought, how are we going to get 500 people to laugh? So we got along this Tunisian comedian to sort of tell jokes and things. And so he stood up there and started telling jokes to them. I could see this wasn't working at all. They were just standing around there. And so eventually I said to the assistant director, the Tunisian assistant, I said, can you tell the crowd to do what I do? So I just sort of burst into laughter, fell on the floor and rolled around waggling my legs in the air. And he said, do that. And of course the entire crowd fell on the floor laughing hysterically, waggling their legs in the air, and the dust rose, and it was just brilliant. But of course we weren't turning over. It was so annoying, you know. And of course then we had to get them to do it again. And of course it wasn't quite the same. It was never quite as funny as that first moment.
The scene that would be the hardest to film would also be the most controversial, the crucifixion of Brian.
Arriving there on the morning of the shoot and seeing all these crosses up on the horizon, and that was kind of a weird moment. And you kind of wondered quite how people would respond to that because, you know, the images were so strong.
It's very chilling to go filming and find a cross with your name on it. And, you know, it's like, oh, good. And it was kind of, you know, being up there for 3 days is quite philosophical. I think I would recommend it for people. I think anybody religious should try the experience because it's kind of interesting. You get an intriguing viewpoint.
4 of us who tended to have chest problems got really quite sick. And I remember thinking the day I was crucified, you know, I wasn't looking forward to being crucified, but to be crucified when you got flu.
It had taken the Pythons some time to come up with a fitting ending to the film. The decision to set the crucifixion to music was not taken lightly.
We wondered whether we could finish with people on the cross, and then suddenly we thought, yes, go for it. It felt right. And my recollection is that Eric came up with the song.
We were trying to find an end, and everybody's on their way to be crucified. You know, this is the end. The plot is going this way. Everybody's been found guilty, and they're all going off to be crucified. How do you end the movie? And I think I said, well, it has to end with a song, clearly. And it has to be a cheery song, a cheery-uppy song. And in fact, like a Disney song with a whistle. And everybody said, oh, yeah, that sounds kind of a funny idea. And I went straight home and I wrote it in about 20 minutes.
And I can remember Eric singing this song to us, singing the end song to us. I wasn't over impressed by it, I have to say, but we didn't have any other ending, so and I thought it'd be quite funny, the whole thing.
The idea that there should be a musical moment is a very nice conceit, and the idea that people will start singing and looking on. The idea it's looking on the bright side when you have absolutely nothing to look forward to. It really says something about the Brits.
I always just thought it'd be funny having a song and dance routine on crosses. It just seemed to be like a non-starter. You know, everybody's tied to this place; they can't move.
That song is in the top 10 of most requested songs at funerals, and has been for 15 years. Isn't that weird and odd and strange and nice?
That's the whole deal. When you come into the world, you're going to die. And if you don't like that, you kind of miss the point, I think. So I love all of that, and the lyrics are very good, you know. It was a wonderful bit of work by Eric, that song, you know. So I think in a way we were all in our different ways working at our best. Certainly Gray was at his best as an actor. I was performing well. Eric was in good form. Michael was superb. Gilliam made the film look good, and Terry Jones was absolutely on top of his game as a director. So it was just one of those moments when it all comes together, because usually in movies it all falls apart.
The shoot was completed, and back in London, Terry Jones began to edit the film in preparation for Life of Brian's scheduled release a few months later. But unbeknownst to the Pythons, the secret was already out. There was a traitor within the ranks. Someone had sent 11 pages of the script to Mary Whitehouse and the Festival of Light.
The nationwide Festival of Light obtained the script from somewhere. I've no knowledge of that. That was all a bit before my time. But nevertheless, the fact that they got the script means that somebody must have sent it to them that was associated with the film.
Alarm bells are ringing at the Festival of Light. Somehow or other, they've got hold of 11 pages of script. It's actually the scene with the leper and so on. And they obviously don't like what they read, but they realise that if they go for this in a big way, then that may be counterproductive. So what they do is they adopt this kind of low-profile, somewhat insidious campaign of saying, oh, let's all pray for the failure of Life of Brian.
But praying was just the start of it. The Festival of Light then wrote a letter to the British Board of Film Censors, urging them to think of the consequences of allowing Life of Brian to be shown. It ended, "I need not remind you of the wider implications of scurrilous abuse of God, Christ, or the Bible." The British Board of Film Censors, in turn, would not give the film a certificate unless they were confident that the film could not be successfully prosecuted for blasphemy. So the Pythons offered to take the film to John Mortimer for legal advice.
They came to see me, and I saw the film, which I thought riotously funny, and it remains one of my favourite funny films.
Arms for an ex-leper!
It was one rather dangerous point where Michael Palin was a leper, and he was cured by Jesus. And he said he was very angry. He said, "Oh, bloody do-gooder, cured me. I can't beg anymore because I'm not a leper anymore." I think the opinion did recognise that it was dangerous, particularly dangerous in the aftermath of the Gay News trial. There obviously were points which a prosecutor would make much of, but our advice about the whole film was really founded on telling the court that Brian and Jesus were two different people, and that Jesus appears in the film as a separate character.
Some of the censorship was done by the Pythons themselves, most significantly scenes involving a character called Otto.
Hey, leader! What? Oh, I'm so sorry. Have you seen the new leader? The what? The new leader. I wish to find him and hail him.
Otto's like a prototype fascist, really. I mean, his view of religion is he wants to purify his religion and get rid of the foreigners.
In one particular scene, Otto talked to Brian about setting up a racially pure, all-Jewish community.
Making it pure! No foreigners, no riff-raff, no gypsies!
It is terribly contentious because it's sort of suggesting that in extremes, Zionism can be compared to Nazism. And this rather extreme criticism was exacerbated by Gilliam taking the motto of the Star of David and making it into a sort of Nazi swastika, which immediately is very, very in your face.
It's right on the edge. Again, you're saying things you're not supposed to say, this time not about Christians, but about Jews in Israel. Important stuff to say, because it's sort of cutting through the hypocrisy, and it's saying the words you're not supposed to say.
Also, Otto rather held up the action. So it was actually Eric Idle himself who decided that Otto, the Nazi Jew, would go.
Though it was, in many ways sad, it was still not really what the film was about. It's a different film.
I'm still not convinced cutting it out was the right thing, because I think that scene's really important.
The only remnant in the finished film is Otto's very brief appearance with his Suicide Squad at Brian's crucifixion.
Suicide Squad! Attack!
that show them, huh?
Plans were also underway to publish the book of the film, but that too could be subject to a prosecution for blasphemy.
The Pythons wanted again to publish a book based on the film. And I read the script and I thought it was absolutely marvellous. I thought this is really the Pythons' masterpiece. It's a wonderful combination of satirical humour, crazy humour, and serious metaphysical humour.
Some cuts were suggested that would ensure safe publication. The Pythons considered them, and Michael Palin called Geoffrey Strawn at Methuen.
The answer came back to me in the most civil possible way from Michael Palin, who gave me a ring. He said, look, we've talked about it. We don't want to make any changes. We don't think that this film is offensive to any living individual. We stand by it. And that's our last word. So I went to my chairman, the chairman of Methuen, and to the boss of Associated Book Publishers, and I said, look, I think this is a wonderful film. I don't think it's in any way unpleasant or offensive. This is the Pythons' decision. We cannot cave in to Mary Whitehouse. So they said, OK, go ahead. The only proviso was that if somebody had to go to prison, it would be me. So I agreed to that.
For he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow.
Life of Brian was completed. The Pythons set out for America. It had been decided to open the film there first, home as it was to freedom of speech, the Constitution, and perhaps even more helpfully, not home to any blasphemy laws. The world premiere was set for New York on August the 17th, 1979. The reviews were positive for the most part.
People were kind of, whoa, you know, I mean, not a bad way, but just they were kind of surprised, impressed at the audacity of the film to go there and to try this kind of stuff.
And some of them were even delivered in keeping with the film itself.
Ye who wouldst not see the Bible satirized, stay thee at home. And ye who would smile at biblical buffoonery, hie thee hence to a theater nearest you. Just knowest beforehand what thou art getting into. Therefore sayest not that thou were not warned, and others will be saved from your gripes of wrath.
And the first gripes of wrath came from probably the least expected place, when Rabbi Abraham Hecht described the film as being blasphemous, sacrilegious, and an incitement to possible violence.
Well, it seemed odd when the film came out that the first group to complain about it was a group that we'd never imagined would want to have anything to complain about at all. And that was I think it was the New York Association of Rabbis. And we thought, well, why are they complaining? I can imagine Christians complaining, but not rabbis. And anyway, they were complaining about the use of the prayer shawl in the stoning sequence, which, you know, we didn't know it was the prayer shawl. We just thought it was a bit of costume, you know. So evidently we were making light of that. So when you're treading on delicate ground, you never know what you're going to be, who you're going to be offending.
In a rare piece of church unity, religious groups banded together to protest about Life of Brian. Here in Variety magazine.
One of my proudest moments is the entire page devoted to Life of Brian. 2 columns, the Protestants protesting, 2 columns, the Catholics protesting, 2 columns, the Jews protesting. That was fantastic. I thought we really hit everybody quite evenly.
The religious community began to wage war on Brian. Demonstrations were hastily organized.
Well, there were going to be riots. They actually were saying that people were going to be killing each other, rioting. Yeah. I just knew it was going to be fun. And it was. They didn't let us down. They were out there parading, marching, screaming, and shouting, you know, just like one would expect.
I don't remember any anxiety at all when they started protesting. I remember just thinking, you know, and you've got to remember that we were not strangers to protest and disapproval. Almost everything I've done in my life at some point or another has been disapproved of or protested against by someone.
One of the biggest demonstrations was by an organization called Citizens Against Blasphemy in New York, headed by the Reverend Roger Fulton.
A group of rabbis and priests held demonstrations over this past weekend, and they were demonstrating against a movie called The Life of Brian. About 250 people gathered in front of the Warner Brothers offices.
Whenever something comes out that at all touches on religion, there's a certain segment of people who are going to be kind of kind of get that Home Alone look on their face, and they're going to be horrified that this is happening. And I mean, see, to me, it doesn't mean the film is good or the film is bad. It just means that when a film like this comes out, people likely, without even seeing it, are going to be offended by it, upset by it, going to feel the need to demonstrate.
Well, you've got to remember that Christianity in America is mainly about sex. They're so deeply uncomfortable about every aspect of sex that they don't much care about wars or destroying the environment or financial corruption. But anything to do with sex sets them off.
Life of Brian was now a news story. Michael, Graham and Terry Jones were invited to appear on NBC's The Tomorrow Show to talk about the diverse reactions to the film.
Did you set out to get the Bible? To really stick the Bible?
Got it, haven't you, Graham?
Not with me, no. No. I don't think we did. Not to get the Bible. I mean, there are bits of the Bible I don't like.
Were you anticipating the challenge to what you will call satire or lampooning that would come from religious organizations?
Yeah, I think we expected to get quite a lot of reaction from religious organisations. Well, not from religious organisations, but we thought there would be a comeback from people.
Yeah. What surprises have you had since the picture was released in terms of the reaction you've gotten? Did you expect that what has happened was going to happen?
I don't know. Of course not. I mean, I just...
Helps to sell tickets.
You never know. I mean, I certainly didn't expect to hear people say that this film might be an incitement to violence. I mean, that was a surprise when I heard that.
That's a very silly thing to say as well, I think.
It's a dangerous thing to say.
And let it be said for the record, gang, this is a funny movie. It's hysterically funny. And why people get upset about it is because I think possibly they see it from, as somebody here said, from their vantage point rather than from the satirical vantage point.
The US protests and marches only served to heighten media profile and increase demand. The original plan to open Brian on 200 screens nationwide snowballed to nearer 600. Certain states banned the film, especially in the Bible Belt, which only fanned the flames more. Back in the UK, word about Life of Brian was spreading, and although the film wouldn't be on general release until the following year, on November the 9th, 1979, John Cleese and Michael Palin were invited to appear on a late-night BBC Two discussion programme hosted by Tim Rice to debate the film in the presence of Mervyn Stockwood, the Bishop of Southwark, and Malcolm Muggeridge, born-again Christian, figurehead of the Festival of Light, and well-known friend of Mary Whitehouse. The stage was set for one of TV's all-time great ding-dongs.
There was obviously going to be quite a heavy interview, perhaps the the strongest criticism we would face. And John and I remember actually sort of mugging up for it, like for an exam, going through my books and, sort of getting all the arguments together.
When I look at that figure, I mean, I know you're going to say Brian isn't Jesus, but I mean, that's just rubbish. The whole thing is quite clearly, if no Jesus had lived, that film wouldn't have been produced.
And the bishop sitting there in all of his purple with the world's biggest silver crucifix. I've never seen one so big, fingering it. And the voices were all headmasters' voices, and they were all dignified.
It's quite humbug to say that this is not a ridiculing of the founder of the Christian religion and of the incarnation in an extremely cheap and tenth-rate way.
Muggeridge, until he was 60, was a well-known womanizer and drinker. And I suspect to some extent he only got religion after he couldn't do anything else. And Mervyn Stockwood was a homosexual, as everybody knew, and also, as it happens, a heavy drinker.
As it went on, an extraordinary thing happened was that we were the ones with the serious points, and they were the ones who were playing to the crowd.
I simply don't think it was worthy of you. It was the sort of thing, as I say, that at Cambridge the footlights did on a damp Tuesday afternoon. Or the lower fourth when I was a schoolmaster.
You keep making the basic assumption that we are ridiculing Christ and Christ's teaching, and I say that we are not.
But do you imagine that your scene, for instance, of the Sermon on the Mount the scene in your film of the Sermon on the Mount is not ridiculing one of the most sublime utterances that any human being has ever spoken on this earth. Of course it is.
No, it's making fun of the guy who's remembered it wrong and of the people who don't understand it and miss the point.
Well, I think
that's really unfair, because I think that a lot of people looking in will think that we have actually ridiculed Christ physically. Christ is played by an actor, Ken Colley. He speaks the words from the Sermon on the Mount. He's treated absolutely respectfully. The camera then pans away. We go right to the back of the crowd to someone who shouts, "Speak up," because they cannot hear him. Now, I mean, if that utterly undermines one's faith in Christ, then I think a faith cannot be terribly strong.
I started off by saying that this is such a 10th-rate film that I don't believe that it would disturb
yes, I know you
anybody's
started with an open
faith.
mind. I realise that.
I'd never been so sort of angry in public before. I don't think. It was just the way they dealt with it. The sort of venom used just because they liked the sound of the words.
I was aware Michael was steaming, but I was kind of enjoying it because they annoyed me. And I reckoned that we were nailing them. I thought we were winning.
As the debate built to a climax, Muggeridge saw red.
All you've done is to make a lot of people on a cross singing a music hall song. It's so disgusting when you think of it.
A lot of people go away very happy, laughing at that, their faith not touched one jot.
I don't think it'll touch their faith. I don't think it will.
I had quotes in my pocket from Malcolm that absolutely validated our position and destroyed his own. And out of kindness, I didn't pull them out and read them out because I was feeling kind of sorry for him. Isn't that unbelievable?
You have succeeded in reducing something which has inspired the greatest art into something which is presented in terms of the lowest art. That's your feat. That's your
achievement. You set up your own terms that we have to influence people. We're not saying we want to influence people. We're trying to make them laugh, make them happy. I mean, that's something that helps.
Gentlemen, I'm going to have to call a halt. I'm very
sorry.
And just as it was being wound up, Mervyn the Bishop delivered his pièce de résistance.
Well, you'll get your 30 pieces. You'll get your 30 pieces of silver. I'm quite sure.
I hasten to add.
For those of you who didn't attend Sunday school, this is a biblical quote and refers to the money that Judas was paid to betray Jesus Christ.
I knew then that we'd won, not because we'd been asked to give our arguments, not because we'd, mugged up and knew what to say, but because they had made, to be honest, fools of themselves.
Somebody said afterwards, you won because you behaved much better than the Christians.
But I came off shaking, really. And the Bishop Stockwood came up to me and said, "Oh, seemed to go pretty well." And I realised for them it was a game. They were taking it far less seriously than we were. He had a couple of whiskies and off he went.
Days later, the television show Not the 9 O'Clock News would send up the whole encounter, effectively turning the tables, with Rowan Atkinson as a bishop who had made a film based on the life of John Cleese.
I mean, I actually find it deeply offensive that in a country that is still ostensibly a Python-worshipping country, that a 14-year-old child can actually get in to see this film. I mean, there is little enough proper Python around these days without parading this distorted garbage about.
Bishop, you directed the film. Did you expect this kind of reaction?
Well, I certainly didn't expect the Spanish Inquisition.
In the UK, the British Board of Film Censors passed Life of Brian uncut with a AA certificate, meaning that anyone over the age of 14 could see it. This despite the lobbying from the Festival of Light, who had pushed for an outright ban.
The miracle was when the censor actually didn't touch the film. That amazed me. I thought it was going to be cut by about 20 minutes. It was very difficult for me to say one of the best British comedies ever without somehow offending even the religious wing of the Guardian readers. So it was one of those things you didn't quite know what to write.
The film had its certificate, but that didn't mean the UK release of Life of Brian would be problem-free, since it was up to local councils to decide whether to allow it to be shown or not. And the Festival of Light now began to write letters to them, still pressing for a ban.
What we said was, look, if you feel strongly about this film, what you have to do is you exercise your democratic rights and write to your local councillors who have authority over the cinemas and who can either reclassify a film or conclude that it's not appropriate for your area.
If you've got the Festival of Light causing trouble, if you've got some fairly conservative views in your local area, then it is quite possible for any local authority to call in a film, view it, and say, no, it can't go on in our cinema.
And it worked. The film was banned in places like East Devon, Cornwall, Swansea, and here in Harrogate.
Councillor Hitchin, why have you banned The Life of Brian?
Because from what we've heard about it, we think that it's going to be an extremely offensive film on religious grounds.
Now, you've not actually seen the film, have you?
No, we haven't.
What reports have you had of it? Where have those reports come from?
The reports have come from the Festival of Light, and they have told us of the attitude of the American Catholic Church and the American Jewish Church.
What do you know about the Festival of Light yourself?
Nothing.
When it got banned in England, we sort of, again, we thought, well, this is very good news for us. And the more publicity Mary Whitehouse gives us, the better, really. So I'm afraid we were applauding any response like that.
When all the good councillors of Cornwall got together in the cinema in Truro, actually it came down to the wire, and the chairman had to give the casting vote, and he voted against the film, and he said that the people who made this film ought to be in Broadmoor local mental prison. And he said, if that's what the cinema is like, and I haven't been to the cinema for 20 years, I'm not going again.
What I was proud about England was that where it was banned in different communities, people would organise share-bang parties and go to the communities where you could see it. I thought, the English, good for them. They're not going to be told what to think.
I mean, it was banned in Southampton, they went to Portsmouth. It happened all up and down the country. And that was better than advertising.
Certain countries like Ireland, South Africa and Norway banned Life of Brian completely. The Norwegians would have to go to Sweden if they wanted to see it, where cinemas proudly proclaimed this film is so funny they banned it in Norway. Almost 30 years on, the film still provokes controversy, still provokes debate.
Yes, I can see, I suppose, why people would have reactions to something that they think is being offensive to them. And maybe it is being offensive to them because it is making fun of people who don't think for themselves. And that's exactly what the whole film's about. So I think it's quite right for people who don't think for themselves to get upset about it.
No, I didn't think it was funny. I thought that it was quite an insult, to be honest.
There's a wonderful song at the end, very cheery song, always look on the bright side of life. And you almost leave the theatre with a hop and a skip. But the lyrics of that song actually are quite despairing. If you listen to Eric Idle saying, we come from nothing, we go back to nothing, we lost nothing. I think fundamentally that is opposed to a faith-based outlook, because a faith-based outlook says, well, actually, there is something at the end of life. There is an afterlife, actually, where we'll be rewarded, we'll be judged according to the good that we did, and we'll be punished according to the bad we did. There is an accounting to be done there. There is hope, actually, for a better life. And that last song denies that. And so I'm not sure that the Python team were just getting at practice of failing. They were actually, in that song, that particular song, they were getting at faith itself.
And the main bone of contention with Life of Brian, from the Christian community's point of view, is very definitely the crucifixion.
To treat crucifixion, I think, as a sort of jolly boys outing, I think that really is something that I felt was really offensive.
Any religion that makes a form of torture into an icon that they worship seems to me a pretty sick sort of religion, quite honestly.
And there's a human spirit that says, no matter what you do to us, fuck you. It's like, that's a human spirit, and that's something that the song sort of does to you too. So I can see very religious people taking that wrongly, but I think it's wrong to take it that way.
In 2004, Mel Gibson released his Passion of the Christ.
This morning on today's box office, The Passion of the Christ. If you lined up to see The Passion this weekend, you were not alone. It's been #1 3 weekends running, pulling in a whopping $264 million so far.
It seemed to Monty Python that the time was right to re-release Life of Brian.
Seeing it so soon after the Mel Gibson film almost made it seem you were more grateful for it, because you say, thank God someone, there's another way to look at this material.
We had no backlash. We had the critics review it in a magnanimous way of seeing it 25 years later in a completely different perspective, comparing it to Mel Gibson's film, which, they were very, very mixed about, and a lot were very concerned about, and they really felt it was a great antidote to Mel Gibson's film.
The intrepid nature of the endeavor, the willingness to make fun of this, the greatest story ever told, I think 30 years on looked even more daring.
And of course, Mel's only mistake in his movie was not having the song. I thought he did really well up to that point with the blood and gore, but no song.
The legacy of the film is unquestionable, and it could easily be argued that it's more relevant today than when it was first released. But would Life of Brian get made in today's climate?
Well, I think it ought to be made today. I think everybody would think twice about doing it today.
I think people are very wary about making any sort of criticism of basic tenets of religious faith, because we've just seen what happens when people get angry. And if it makes them that angry, back off.
When you suddenly have to think to yourself, now, can I write this? Because maybe I'll be offending somebody, some of religious susceptibilities or racial susceptibilities. I mean, it's ridiculous.
I don't think you ever want to hurt anyone's feelings, but sometimes, as with the Islamic world now, there are certain things they believe in which are quite contrary to what we believe in. I don't really think our values are less important than theirs, so I guess you just have to have a clash and say, that's the way it is.
I don't understand, well, I do understand, but I don't want to accept a world of such paranoia, of such thin skin, of such, that causing offense is the greatest crime you can do to somebody. This is ridiculous. What happened to sticks and stone can break my bone, but words can never hurt me.
The film represents one of the happiest and most productive periods in Python history, and many scenes have now achieved iconic status.
The group scenes with the various members of the Judean People's Front, that was a lovely thing to play.
Campaign for Free Galilee. People's Front of Judea.
There was invention going on there, as well as basically a good, strong script. And I think scenes like that, everybody felt, this is our one chance to get this.
What tough titty for you, fish face!
There's one particular moment that I love, and that is when Graham is trying to pretend that he's one of the guys teaching, so that the Roman centurions won't pay any attention. And he starts regurgitating this very badly remembered version of the master and the servants. He said there was this master and he had two servants, and somebody who's very skeptical says, what were their names?
What were they called? What were their names? I don't know. And he gave them some talents. You don't know?
I think that is a wonderful, wonderful comment, because it exposes the weakness of fundamentalist Christianity. It's taking stuff literally that is quite clearly supposed to be taken metaphorically, and I love that moment.
Oh, they were called Simon and Adrian. Now... Oh, you said you didn't know! It really doesn't matter. The point is, there were these two servants. He's making it up as he goes along! No, I'm not!
It's the, follow the shoe. No, it's a sandal. Follow the gourd. Is my favorite scene, because it is... In 5 minutes, we do the history of any major religion and all of its heresies and its punishments and its madness. And I think that is an extraordinary scene.
He has given us a sign! Oh, he has given us a shoe! The shoe is the sign. Let us follow his example. What? Let us, like him, hold up one shoe and let the other be upon our foot, for this is his sign, that all who follow him shall do likewise. Yes. No, the shoe is a sign.
Comedy is not particularly difficult. You can get laughs doing any number of things, but to get laughs at an intelligent level about an important subject, whoo, that's good.
Always look on the bright side of life. Always
I was blind and now I can see. Oh! You're cured, mate. Bloody do-gooder. What have the Romans ever done for us?
Something you've forgotten, and that's to laugh and smile and dance.
Crucifixion? Yes, good.
Silly chumps.
I got lumps of it down the back.
I'm And
What?
always look on the light.
Me with a poor dying
side of
grandmother?
life.
10?
Always look on the bright side of life.
He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy.
Always look on the bright side of life. I told them, Bernie, I said they'll never make their money back.